What's going on, guys? Welcome to In the Zone, where we dive deep into the world of skill acquisition, mental focus, and various training zones in the world of baseball. And I'm your host, Garrison Roy. And on this podcast, we're going to go over rants. We're going to have full-length interview, which is what today's episode is today, and then also mental minutes or quick game hacks, and then also deep dive educational ones. But if you have any questions, topics, or suggestions, you can reach out in the zone podcast 123 at gmail.com. But for today, like I said, we got a full-length interview with Cam Lanzilli. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Correct. Yeah.
Awesome. Love it. Well, Cam, what's going on, man?
Nothing. Just getting adjusted to a new home and kind of just head spinning a little bit. Been all over the place lately, but excited to be on here.
Yeah, I know the feeling of when you're transitioning into a new role, you kind of get a little bit of like almost like you're drinking through a fire hose with the amount of information you're trying to take in
Yeah,
all at once, right?
no doubt.
But that's awesome though.
Mm.
So kind of give us a little bit more of a background of like, your playing days and then what kind of led you into this role that you're currently at right now.
Yeah. So I'm actually from Boston, Massachusetts. It's hard to think hard to think back that far because I don't spend a ton of time there anymore, even though my family still lives there. So just go back to see them essentially. But yeah, I went to play baseball at the University of Massachusetts, and eventually transferred after a couple ankle surgeries and some some issues in my lower half there on the left side, and eventually played at Eckerd College in St. Petersburg, Florida.
Yeah.
Um, Through there, I had numerous roles after college. I interned at Perfect Game. I worked in their scouting. I did different things with that. Became a pitching coordinator for an agency. Then I coached at Florida Southern. Um, then from there, I eventually got a job in player development with the Baltimore Orioles. I went to a private sector facility called Ascent Athlete. That's actually gotten pretty big now. Really big, beautiful, spacious facility. While I was there, I was actually doing some associate scouting for the Los Angeles Angels and helping on second opinions on pitchers and data stuff like that. And then from there, I've landed at Kinetic Pro, and I'm working over with Casey Mulholland, who I had always used to go visit and try to learn from a lot of the things that he was doing, especially since they're just like a uh, cutting edge like private sector spot that works with different technological advancements that aren't really being used across like not even private sector or college, but even MLB orgs aren't at the level that some of the stuff that they're doing. And I always told Casey how envious I was of it. So it's pretty cool to be down here in Tampa and be able to join the team that they have that's already so great. So I'm excited to see what I can do to help.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, and Tampa doesn't suck either. It's a great spot to be located at for sure.
Exactly. Exactly.
I love it. Well, yeah, I'm kind of going off a tangent here with the technological advancements that you were talking about. I know they were kind of coming out with something similar to a Moda sleeve, but it was
Yeah.
similar concept, but different in the structure of how it was actually gaining data,
Yeah.
right? I'm not sure if you're allowed to even talk about that or what you've already known about it, but that was just
Yeah.
something that I kind of heard to a grapevine.
Yeah, no, I mean, biggest, honestly, like the biggest thing in my adjustment period into KP versus doing like workload management through like the subjective mindset and like doing it the best I can is like everything is so objective. Like we have to be able to see it on a screen. And like I love that. Like I can be nerdy in that way where like I need to know that I'm doing things 100% right rather than to be like, oh, I've done this a million times. So having the KP sleeves and their technology being like developed through Nextiles, which honestly, even while I was at Ascent, I was having meetings with the guys over at Nextiles, and they were essentially showing us what they do and how they're able to measure like valgus torque on the elbow, how they're able to measure arm speed, how they're able to measure like different loads on the arm. It's kind of cool to see how like future performance is dependent on these things, and how like managing your workload and being able to like tell a guy, all right, like we went a little crazy this day, like is our tissue tolerance there? If not, we're going to have to gradually build it up, or else the load's going to be too high on our arm to be able to withstand those rigors. It's really cool to have that ability to say like, hey, we're doing too much, we're doing too little, etc. So I'm very fortunate to be here. I'm excited.
Yeah, no, for sure. And there's a lot of, when we were back in our playing days, I say like back in our day, like as if we're like super old school, but we didn't have any of that stuff. I think Modus was like just becoming a thing towards the tail end of my college career, right? So like having all of this stuff to actually have as a measurable is huge. And especially, a lot of people talk about the workload management, but I'm on the kind of little bit of a soapbox where guys are trying to return to throw from surgeries or injuries or whatever it is, right? And to make sure that they're getting similar stresses to what they were going to get to in the game, because I think there's a huge gap there for that. And I don't want to point the blame or finger and say like, oh, it's the PT's fault or it's the orthopedics fault, or it's really all of our faults because we're not like collaborating and learning how to come up with a uniform, thought process or structured progression, right? And one of the other guys that I've had on the podcast, Scott Richardson, he's kind of taken the forefront on that too, on the physical therapy side. And he talks a lot about how the traditional, 1980s model where guys are throwing certain distances, a certain amount of throws, that overall workload volume, like if you look at it, objectively, it's kind of like you kind of stagnate and then you just get a crap load of volume, but the stress level doesn't really get to the point where it needs to, or there's no like progressive load, like as you would think in terms of weight training, right? It's kind of more like steep on ramp and then it kind of plateaus off. That's kind of interesting too.
I think it kind of reminds me of like, I always play this thought in my head. It's like work capacity is so skill specific. It's like if we aren't doing the skill that we're going to perform over time, like how are we going to be able to do it consistently? So that's why, building up tolerance is at like a gradual increase it seems so simple and it's worth measuring, but it's like the most obvious way that you can treat that.
No doubt. Absolutely. Well, and it's one of those things too, where, kind of applying it to your current situation, like you're going in, you're moving in, or maybe a player is going to a new school, he's having to learn all those other stuff. So it's like very steep ramp up of like having all this stuff here. And so your brain kind of gets overloaded and you're like, oh, okay, I got to figure this out. But then eventually you start to adapt to what you need to do. Or, as the Moneyball quote is, adapt or die.
Adapt or die.
Right? So I love it. Well, yeah, so kind of getting off that tangent a little bit now, I kind of wanted to go in because I was just following you on Twitter recently. I know that you went down to WWBA, and I know that event's been crazy. Really for the past maybe 10 years or so, where a lot of you hear the stories of like all these golf carts like rolling in behind the fields, and then you actually see the pictures and you're like, wow, okay, like this is actually, people are shifting over in Roger Dean Stadium, and all the backfields just kind of going around and floating and seeing guys play, which is pretty neat. But I think it's unique for you to be in that position because a lot of people who also train in the labs, so to speak, like us, don't typically always go to the field, right? Like we're kind of just stuck in our little scientific, theories, so to speak, right? But actually going in and being able to apply that in an actual game is a huge differentiator. So how has your thought process kind of evolved and blended over into like what you're actually applying in the training setting versus when you're on the field?
Yeah. So, um, no, it's a this is something that kind of feels like a constant evolving conversation for us, where we're like, where is the appropriate time for showcasing? Where is the appropriate time for development? Development's ever evolving. Development goes from working with us to the field to your weight room to your classroom. It's something that's constant, and showcasing is maybe for some guys a 1%, maybe a 10%, but it
Mhm.
doesn't exceed like a 20%, or it shouldn't exceed a 20%, especially if you're good enough, to where you don't need to get to that point where development is your greatest outlier. So I think being on like the line of sight of how it went with WWBA, I was fortunate enough to have a buddy, Johnny Magliozzi, who is a scout with the Mets, coaches with the Ninth Inning Royals team down in Georgia, and he has a really good group, guys from mostly a concentration of Georgia, but a little bit all over. And then me and him had been talking, and I was gonna send him a couple of my pitchers, one of my hitters from back at Ascent, and he was like, "Hey man, why don't you just come along and coach with me down here?" So I went down to Jupiter, worked with him, and brought some of my guys down, which was awesome because a lot of these kids, our relationships are so personal. Like, treat them like my little brothers, who sometimes I yell and scream at, and sometimes I pat them on the back in good moments, but try to have a little bit of mix between the two. But when we're down there, it's like you said, it's like I've been working with these guys in such a controlled environment. Like, how do the things work when we're playing top teams in the country, when we're playing FTB Phillies National, where
Mhm.
half their teams perfect game All Americans, and most of every guy on their team's going to play Power Five baseball, and that's those are like external factors that you don't think about. You think about, oh, how windy, how rainy is it going to be today, how is the mound, but you don't think, okay, I got to go face Andre Meduno, who might hit a ball 500 feet off me. um, so there is that anxiety, but our guys handled it really well, which was exciting to see. And that's why, like, a big part of what I try to do is, like, during their high school seasons when they're in a little bit less, like, I try to go to games. I try to see how they handle these things. Are guys having track meets on them constantly? Um are they fidgeting when they come set? Like, are they not throwing as many strikes in game as they are in a bullpen setting? So it comes down to that level of like actually understanding your player, because being in controlled environments is one thing, and like it is so important, that development piece of, hey, like when we get into bullpens, when we have TrackMan or whatever ball flight tools we're using, um, our shapes optimal, our stuff in general, velocity, is that there? Are we moving mechanically sound? Is everything transferring in like a proper kinematic sequence? Those things matter a ton, and that's what we try to set the stage for. And but then replicating them is of the utmost importance. So, because generally nothing that we do inside really matters unless we can transfer it over. So,
Oh
but
yeah.
yeah, I mean, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying, like, I totally agree. And you could have like your training heroes,
Yeah.
which I've seen from time to time, like they do really well in controlled environments. As soon as you start to throw some other things in there, like adding a stand-in hitter or umpire, balls and strikes call, stuff kind of hits the fan. They
Yeah.
start to kind of, and it could be like a mental thing, a little nervousness or
Yep.
lack of exposure to that. And that's why kind of like the whole podcast call it being in the zone is like learning how to be in that flow state when you're playing, because that's what really matters at the end of the day is your performance on the field
Yep.
in games, right?
Yeah.
So for me, and this is like you said, ever evolving thing, but within the past year or so, I've started to try to sprinkle in as much of those variables that you would get in a game as much as you can, right? In a controlled setting, like versus just throwing into a net, like, hey, let's throw to a partner if you have one available, or if you're in a bullpen, let's add in a stand-in hitter. Let's call some balls and strikes or have someone do that to where you're almost simulating something a little bit more game-like than it being too, in fancy term of decontextualized from the game itself.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, there's so many factors to it. And I think that's why having like a relationship with your I guess training coach, me being with these guys throughout a year and them going out to play, whether it's high school baseball or travel baseball, whatever, and then being able to go to Jupiter and like coach these guys and actually be like, hey man, like you're a 1/6 of the plate right now, and these dudes are these dudes run 6 threes out here. We're not going to be able to slow them down no matter who's behind the plate. That communication and transparency is so important for us. So um but yeah, like it's fun to see how that process evolves with baseball players and how we can have our stamp on it, whether we're 10 feet away or we're back in the office and they're just shooting us text messages about how it
Yeah.
went, what they saw, and what feedback they got. So,
Oh,
um,
absolutely. Well, and you can only get so much from video, right? Like kind of getting it from a remote or outside perspective. Like if you're always at the training facility and you just get a video of like maybe one at bat, but he didn't show you that like he tipped the pitches
mhm,
3 at bats before. He's like, oh,
yeah.
I was just getting shelled. And I'm like, well, your mechanics look fine. But those little things you can definitely pick up a lot easier. Like you said, like slower times to the plate. Like,
Yeah.
those are somewhat controllables that they can master and actually practice. Because,
Yeah.
once the ball leaves your hand, like that's it. It
Yeah.
can't really do anything, can't control whether the umpire calls it a ball or strike, can't control if the guy hits it 500 feet or swings and misses, right?
Yeah.
Like it's already done. But
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think like kind of honing in on the showcase to development um like topic that we're on, it's there is an aspect of like, are you ready to showcase? Like, are you
mm,
healthy to showcase? Are you good enough to showcase? Does anybody care if you're at this showcase? So I mean that's why,
that's huge.
yeah, there are prerequisites. Like this might sound a little too to the point, but the guys who I brought down there were guys who, I mean, I threw two guys after I threw two guys against Philly scout team, who's obviously recognized as one of the best teams in the country, and these two guys gave up between 5 innings between the two of them. They gave up one hit and two walks, and these were guys who were ready to do it. These are guys who had
So
the
huge.
stuff to compete against them. They had the mental wherewithal to be able to handle. I mean, my my second guy had as difficult as a situation as you can have, and I looked around. I was like, there is no one I'd rather have with the ball right now. He had the bases loaded. We're up 3-0. We have a one hitter going, and inning starts out, they have top of the order up, ground ball to third base, boots it, or kid tripped on his own feet, walk after like an 8 pitch at bat, and then another, or then I think like a hit by pitch where the hitter went to swing and it like caught his hand. Yeah.
It
We
does.
have two out. We have two outs, and the Andre Meduno kid who I just mentioned is like number 13 player in the country, 6'5", 215, 97 off the mound, and hits balls into orbit. And he's coming up to the plate, and we're just like, well, that's the winning run, and there's nobody in the country who hits balls farther than this guy. So if it's going to go bad, it's going to go bad here. But we have a kid on the mound who I really trust, and he's evolved past this setting of like of showcasing. It's like
Mhm.
we know he's going to get guys out. We know his development has been on point because he's done the right things. He's mastered his slider shape. He's mastered his release height to carry fastball where he's going to get swing and misses underneath. He's mastered like mirroring his changeup off his fastball and creating side spin on it. So that's where those things come into play. And we get into an 8-pitch at bat with this kid, and he's fouling off tough pitch after tough pitch, throw a slider right down the middle, swings and misses. And you want to say, like, first things first, the pitcher, like, commendable. Like, you have the balls to throw that pitch. You are tough enough to stand there and like with hundreds of scouts around you, one of the best teams in the country in the other dugout, you were able to shut that out and focus on the task. However, you also have an unbelievable slider shape at 81 miles per hour, and you got a swing and miss from one of the best hitters in the country. Like, there's something to say about both things where it's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
can you withstand this? Do you have the ability to create a swing and miss in the first place? So that's where like that showcasing and development all kind of comes together. It's like, are you even able to showcase anything yet?
Yeah. Well,
That's
that's a
where,
good point of view to have too, especially with your scouting background. It's like, hey, like these are some of the things that we're going to look for. If you don't have a plus, you know, secondary pitch or even just plus velo, like there's nothing really for you to go showcase, my man. Like
yeah,
you're better off developing and trying to get better,
yeah,
and a lot of it's kind of tough to get some, not even just the kids, because I think they can kind of intuitively know just being around other guys that might be better than them.
yeah,
Or maybe they haven't been exposed to that, and that also is probably part of the issue.
yeah.
But the parents too, like they, can kind of get a little bit into a whirlwind where it's like, hey, we're paying all this money for us to be on this national team or whatever, but you got 40 people on the roster and
Yeah,
each person's only going to throw one inning, and you're just like, dude,
yeah,
at some point you are going to just be like, hey, like, is it really worth going down to do that to only get 3 or 4 ABs? Probably not, right? Like you want to be one of the dudes that's going to help win.
yeah, yeah.
So, and I guess more so for your questions, like how do you have those conversations with guys that might be, those fringe guys that they're not dudes, they're not guys that are gonna really go out and perform and do that, but they have some potential, right? But you are just kind of in the gray with them. You're like, hey, like you could showcase, or you could stay back here, get better, get everything else to be a little more elite, and then maybe showcase yourself. How do you navigate those conversations? And I know they're tough, but just
Yeah, yeah. Uh, Honestly, I think we've been doing this long enough in the sense of like you have been at Cressy, Tread, etc., where like you've had enough of these conversations where like me telling a guy who's 15 years old that he doesn't need to go to the PBR showcase to show off his 75-mile-per-hour fastball is me saving a family money, me saving a family time, and me saving a family like just
really,
just the mental thought of like, oh, like why would I keep wasting money on these things to get nothing out of it? Um so like I think just being able to like sit guys down. I always talk about like a culture is always led by its like leader or director in many senses. Um, I think one thing that I harp on is understand our process comes from a place of wanting the best for guys and not a place of like doubt.
Mm.
I've had so many guys ask me about certain schools where they'll be like, "Hey Cam, I know you have a connection to X, Y, and Z Power Five school. Do you think you could get them in front of me if I go throw in wherever I go throw?" And I'll sit the person down and be like, "Hey, you're not there. However, you're 15 years old, 16 years old. Do believe if you get to X, Y, and Z, you could be there." And players appreciate that. I think players appreciate transparency. But then there typically is a route for a lot of guys. Like there's so
Mhm.
many levels to baseball. Um, and you know what? Like a lot of a lot of people are very much honest with guys, and I respect it. But telling a guy like, "Hey, just settle for this." I like when a guy's like, "Oh, you doubt me right now, Cam? I'm gonna prove it to you in 3 months that I'm good enough to play there." And I love that. I
Mhm.
love that. And it's not them telling me I'm wrong. It's them telling me I'm going to be there if you give me time and you keep giving me the same effort that you've been giving me. So that, I mean, that just fires me up. Uh, I think in any setting of a guy like trying to push past where he's been and like creating a roadmap or a game plan that says like I will be there is it's super cool. So
Oh,
um,
absolutely. And it all starts in their mindset too, right? Like it's like, hey,
yeah,
having that mindset, like, and I was in that place where I had, I guess I can talk about it now because I'm not playing anymore. I had Brent Strom literally come up to me and said, "You'll never throw 90." And that lit a fire under my ass. I
yeah,
was like, okay, F you. Like, here we go. Ended up throwing like topping out at 92, but
yeah,
still, I was like, I still had that in the back of my head every time I was training, every time I was going after something. It was just kind of like, I'll show you, Brent. Like, I know you're
yeah,
coaching a bunch of big league guys and you
yeah,
probably have a better idea of me, but still, it's there's a psyche to that guys tap into, or, a typical guy who's looking to try to play in the big leagues, that he's going through school and the teachers are like, "Oh, do you really want to play baseball for the rest of your life? Is that really what you want to do?" And a lot of them are just going to be like, "Guess what? My work ethic is going to show it, and I'm going to stick it to whoever says I can't."
yeah, exactly. Yeah, very cool. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I think there's a lot to that too. But to your point, it's good to be realistic, but also have a plan of how you're going to get there,
yeah,
not just and you could be on two different sides of the coin. You could be brutally honest and say like, "Hey, you're never going to get here," or you could be the guy who's like, "Okay, hey, like this is where you want to be. Here's point A, here's point B. We got to do all this work to get there."
yep,
And then there's another opposite end, right? So you need like left, right extremes, and then that was kind of like the middle. But the other extreme would be someone who just keeps blowing smoke up the kid's butt, just kind of saying the right things or saying things to make them think that they might still get there, but realistically, it's probably not going to happen.
yeah, yeah. Um, no, so yeah, I think the biggest things are just being transparent, being honest, showing, having like tangible, like real examples of like this is where you're at, this is where you can
Mhm.
be. Nothing is guaranteed. Work for it. Believe in your process. Believe in your environment. But yeah, it's having a parent understand that is probably harder than having the player understand it, though.
100%.
Sometimes that's a little too much. That's a little bit out of our pay grade.
No doubt. No
Yeah.
doubt. That's a whole nother animal to try to tackle. But I think it's becoming easier for us as coaches to identify what those like dashboard indicators are for a guy who needs to be a power five guy versus, whenever I was playing, and again, this was like 2012, first year or my senior year in high school, you were like, hey, if you light up the radar gun, you're going to probably get looked at.
Yeah.
But we didn't have anything as far as like what our vert was, how our stuff was moving. It was just a lot more subjective. And a lot of the old school guys I respect, they can look at it and actually still be able to say, okay, hey, this plays or this doesn't play, right? Like it could be like a super loopy curveball, might get a bunch of high school kids out. But if you have something that's really sharp, has high, velo, which me and you probably are on the same page, like velo is probably more important in off-speed pitches than it is fastballs when it comes to stuff, right? Like your guy that you were talking about, I didn't catch his name, but 81 mile an hour slider, like that's pretty elite.
Yeah, sweeper.
Yeah, absolutely. But like those little measurables we didn't really have back then. It was just more of like, okay, hey, we just have these stats. Did you get dudes out? Yeah. Okay, cool. And you have guys.
Yeah. And again, I'm still going to the field with a notebook, and I'm sitting there on the side, walking around, like tracking swing and miss, tracking called strikes, tracking different things. Still got my stopwatch. Like I'm still doing all those things. Like, but man, like again, nothing but respect for anyone who delves deep into why guys are successful. But like I will always go on the line of sight of like being objective. Like growing up hearing like, wow, this guy has a lot of life to his fastball. His fastball's really heavy. He um backspins it really well. Like how much backspin? How much life? Like I want to know that. Like I want to confirm what my eyes are telling me. And I think that's where it gets like a little bit lost in the shuffle here. It's like, okay, Nolan has an 81 mile per hour slider. That's really good. If that's a gyro slider, that's pretty good. That's a sweeper. Oh, like that has 10 inches plus a sweep. Like who's going to hit that? Now we have a big
Oh
league
yeah,
sweeper.
you're gonna miss a lot of barrels that way for sure.
Yeah. So I mean, that's where I like always say there's so much context and everything. It's like I want to find out every bit of detail so that I can like confirm what my eyes are telling me, or I can like find out something that like I didn't see in the first place, and we have those tools. So use them accordingly.
100%. Well, what are, I guess, as objective as you want to be, do you think there still are some quote unquote intangibles that some guys might have that you still may only see in person versus like in a video, or maybe getting to know the kid a little bit better?
100%. Yeah.
What might be some of those things that you would look for?
I think the example that I gave earlier of like, I know what I'm going to keep using Nolan as an example because I'm already here, but I know what Nolan does on the mound. Like I know he has the low release, high carry, fastball. He's going to get a ton of swing and miss underneath. I know he's going to miss a lot of barrels with his slider because he has 10 inches of sweep. The slider is up to like 80, 81. But also like confirming the thought that he goes out there with the bases loaded in front of a million scouts, in front of a million All-Americans, in front of a rowdy dugout, and has the ability to like shut it all out. Like that is it ties into like what the equation of a good pitcher is. And that's why you have to have both. It's but like again, so we work on these things from like a private setting, like eliminate the environment. Like we have completely put ourselves in a box here, and we work on these things, and then we go try to mirror what we just worked on with all the externalities. And to be able to shut out the externalities is really hard for a high school senior or a high school freshman or whatever it may be. So that's where it comes down to. It's like I don't care about one thing, I care about everything. But
Mhm.
like I just won't put so much into the 1%, if that makes sense. Like
Oh,
I care a lot about the 99%.
mhm.
Um, where other guys will get caught up in the 1% where it's like, oh, he's slow to the plate, he's bad at PFPs, he's this, that. Well, we can work on those. Like
Yeah, those
you
are
can't write a guy off for that. You can write a guy off for throwing 80 miles per hour, regardless. Like you 99.9% of the time you can write a guy off for that.
mhm.
The 1% is always going to be controllable. So, but another part of that is like, are you able to withstand the anxiety that these events put on players? So, um, yeah, I care about it all. I think everyone should measure every aspect of it. And while we can't measure, maybe we can, but
Yeah, I mean, agree with you.
while we're not at the moment measuring guys like anxiety levels on the mound or how like tough they are, or how this, they, that, whatever. Um, past success, current success, watching a guy's body language, we can get an idea of it, and getting that idea is like something that should always be put into the equation.
100%. Well, I guess the big question I'm asking myself,
Mm.
and I'll ask you this too, and I don't have the answer. I don't think anyone really does, but do you think that that is trainable? Like having that competitive edge or, being in the zone, right? Like, can you actually cultivate that in a training environment or even, being side by side with him in a game? Like, can you tap him into another level of that?
Yeah, like I think trainable is an interesting word.
Mm,
I do think you can add to it, and like I've been saying, it's like you're only a product of the environment or a product of the culture that's around you that the leader instilled. Um, trying to have guys understand that like you need to go be bulldogs. Like some schools are like, oh, we only recruit like tough bulldogs, whatever. Um, I'd love to see that school not recruit the 100-mile-per-hour arm, by the way, first of all.
yeah,
But
right.
um, but I'm always like, you wouldn't take that guy still, even like just teach him. But uh, yeah, I think so. With that being said, is it may be trainable if you're in a college setting, high school, whatever. However, what are your parents like?
Mm,
What's your brother and sister like? Were you raised uh were you raised with somebody holding your hand, or were you raised to go into the jungle and fight off a bunch of lions or whatever? Like that's those are things that are sometimes out of our control. And that's why you see MLB orgs um that have like therapists, that
mm,
have people who you can go sit down and talk to and explain your issue. Explain your issue when it's something so simple as like, oh, I have trouble reacting to the curveball because I'm afraid it's going to hit me at first and then
mm.
lands over the plate, or it's something as simple as, or it's something as complex as I step on the mound and I see the bright lights and like it's over for me. It's over. But my bullpens are incredible. And we see it so often with guys that that's the issue. So,
Yeah.
uh,
Oh, absolutely. Well, and not to get too far off topic, but it all kind of circles back to this point is, you have guys who play multiple sports and things like that. Like, let's say, for example, a guy, he plays baseball and football. I'm willing to bet that guy's probably more willing to have that dog because he had to be so physical and was getting hit and had to get back up.
mm,
Right. Like, not saying that that's something that, oh, because he played football is making him more mentally tough. It's not
yeah,
necessarily true. Like, you can't say that that cause is completely correlated, but I think that can help some guys just be a little bit more competitive, a little bit more of that dog in them, I
mm,
guess, in a weird way. But you're 100% right. Like, having that environment piece and learning a little bit more about what they were brought up in can definitely help them out, or kind of tap into a little bit more of what they're mental capacity is like. But like, let's say you have a kid and he had older brothers, and that he were, how brothers are, like we always kind of like pick at each other. It was very competitive, wouldn't let him win all the time. So he had a little bit more of a competitive drive. So then you're like, oh, okay, like this guy might have a little bit of that to tap into because
Yeah.
he was in that environment. Or
Yeah. That's
even the things that we as coaches can control, like, okay, do you have other people that are training around him, that are pushing him, that are helping him kind of, you know, get to that point to where it's not just kind of, hey, we're just going through the motions and just throwing our pins with a coach that's setting down a bucket, or, just a catcher and just kind of mulling your way through? Or are you actually competing with the guy next to you? Are you inserting some of those little things that you can have? I think that part is on our end a little bit more controllable
yeah.
than we give it credit for.
Yeah, yeah. No, I sorry, I'm laughing while you're saying that. You made me think back of something like my little brother plays in the White Sox organization. He played baseball at Arkansas, and
Yeah.
remember we were at an Oklahoma State regional when he was playing, and it's like incredibly hostile crowd. And he had gone on first base. I don't know if he got hit by a pitch or what, but he's sliding back. He can run a little bit, and the pitcher's like picking off. First baseman slapping on hard tags, and I'd consider my family on the tougher end. Like dad was an all-American wrestler, was in the Air Force, pretty tough dude.
Again.
And my brother like is obsessed with UFC fighting, played hockey and football growing up. And he plays baseball like a football player. It's hilarious. But kid kept slapping hard tags on him, and I never see Chris, my brother, play with anxiety. Like he just goes out and just lets it rip. He's just like, I'm just trying to hit a ball 500 feet every time. That's kind of why he's successful. But this kid slapping on these hard tags, and finally Chris gets sick of it and like shoves the kid and like stands over him, and he's just like, do it again. And we go back that night, and they made like a big deal out of it. They gave both of them warnings, whatever, kept playing. But we go back that night, and I remember Chris Burke on ESPN going, "Oh, Lanzilli, Boston Italian kid." He goes, he was saying something on like the line of, this is his type of party right here. Like he hears the crowd, he hears people booing him. This kid's slapping on dirty tags to him. Like this is his type of party right here. And it's like, you know what? Like Chris is very athletic. He's very strong. He's this, he's that. But like he goes out there and it's the same game every time. Like he just tries to run through brick walls. So, I mean, that is where it gets caught up with guys where it's like, man, if you don't if you don't go out there and attack it the same way every day, if there's something else that's occupying half of your brain, it's hard to get consistent results. It's hard to consistently be in the zone. It's hard to consistently perform at the best level. So yeah, it's a lesson for all of us in anything we do, whether we're working with a guy who's just a Cy Young winner, and we're like, dang, I got to be on my best performance today. Or you can go into it and just be like, man, I do this for a living. Like
Yeah.
it's what I do. Like, so that I think those are the guys who are the best at it.
Absolutely. It's all in that mindset, I think. And
Yeah.
I love it. I think that's honestly a great stopping point. But if you had any other closing remarks or thoughts to get out there, feel
No, that's good. That's good. That was a good conversation.
no, yeah, I love it. Well, how can people get in touch with you, and if they want to reach out, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah. I think the two easiest things are Twitter and Instagram, I guess. My Twitter is at Lanzilli Cam. Lanzilli, tough last name, but tough last name to spell, but it's Lanzilli and then Cam, Cam.
Yeah,
And then
I'll put all this in the show notes for you guys listening to. But
perfect. And then my Instagram is Lanzilli Pitch Pro. So yeah, anyone ever has questions or even just wants to talk about whatever, the DMs are always open.
I love it. I love it. It's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah,
Cam, appreciate your time this morning.
yeah.
And for those of you listening, stay in the zone.